Thank you very much, Faith. Yes, indeed, we are joined by the President, Cyril Ramaphosa. Mr. President, thank you very much for your time. Record high unemployment levels, an economy that's not doing well at all. It must have been tough to try and craft the message that will convince South Africans that your government is on top of things.
Well, we are going through a very difficult economic cycle, and we've acknowledged that, and it is generally known what the broad causes are, and some of the causes are low demand in the economy and the slow process of the reforms that we need to put in place, and just the global economy as well. So the causes are known, and the solutions is what we are crafting now. And unemployment is one of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge that we are having to confront. And low growth is a twin brother or sister to that. So yes, it's been a tough message to craft, but it has also been a message that we've wanted to give hope. We've entered a new decade, and we depicting it and characterizing it as a decade of hope, a decade of promise, and we're putting a lot of things in place that are going to act as the foundation on which we are going to be able to build future growth. And we've done a lot of things that position us well. For instance, we've been tackling state capture, which tended to be one of the inhibitors of our ability to grow, particularly our state-owned enterprises, and the reforms that we're putting in place that in large measure the business community have been urging us to implement, things like visas, water licenses, and all that. So all that we are doing, but more importantly, we are also working very closely with the business community, with labor, with civil society, and I meet them once every month, and we go through very practical things of unlocking the levers of growth that we are bound to have. So I think we're setting the system to enable us to capture the growth that our economy is going to have moving into the future.
Your finance minister has tweeted saying, without deep structural economic reforms, we are doomed. But what are we talking about, if I'm assuming you agree with him?
Well, there are quite a number of reforms that Treasury has identified as set out in their paper, and the paper that is now being broadly discussed by everyone. And in large measure, those reforms are reforms that will lead to benefits a little later, in the medium term and in the long term. And so right now we're also dealing with immediate reforms. Simple things like changing the visa process to enable more tourists to come, so that we can give a huge boost to the tourism industry. And simple things like water licenses. Instead of waiting for 3 years, we're now saying people can get a water license within 35 or 40 or 45 days. And those are the things that are able to unlock growth in the economy, because employers or companies can then invest, almost immediately take decisions for investment. So reforms can be characterized into three: immediate, medium phase, and long term. And that's what we are looking at. And so when the finance minister talks about deep reforms, he's talking about those that will have a long-term impact. But we are busy right now with reforms that Cabinet has agreed to, that we're processing and going ahead with.
Now, the people say, but we've heard this message before, that over the past couple of years, you've been saying all the right things, but the situation is not improving.
Yes, the message has been heard before, but I think now we are giving this message with a much stronger element of acting on it. And we're acting on it not alone. We're acting on it with our social partners, business community, labor, as well as civil society. As I said, whenever I meet them, we look at all the things, ones that we agreed at the Job Summit, and two things that we need to do going forward. One of the issues, of course, that they have raised is, just state-owned enterprises that are putting a brake on our growth, particularly Eskom. And they have raised that very, very sharply. And a team of people at NEDLAC has looked at that. And right now, in the past few days, obviously, we've seen some processes. The new CEO has now come in, and he's now dived into the job, ensuring that all managers are accountable. And of course, we saw the chairman stepping down, and we're going to have a replacement soon. But we're also going to revamp the board. The board is going to be revamped, and we will be repositioning Eskom as we also deal with the restructuring that we've spoken about in relation to Eskom. So it may be slow, and Eskom holds the fortunes of the lives of South Africans and its economy in its hands, and it has a very, very debilitating effect. But we are going to be addressing all those issues, and as I've said in the past, I'd like South Africans to be patient, to give the new management time to bed everything down, to go on with the maintenance process, and also to give the new board that we are going to appoint time. And the war room as well, that's being led by the Deputy President time. So we're not sleeping on the job. We are working continuously to address all these issues.
Were you shocked by Jabu Mabuza's resignation?
No, I wasn't. And I think one thing we must do is to applaud people like Jabu Mabuza, who has taken accountability. And I think this is a culture that we must inculcate in the South African landscape, both economic and political, that when things that were supposed to happen go wrong, we must take accountability. So I applaud him for taking accountability. And this does not take any shine from his personality or who he is. It basically means that he is a person who says, having given you the promise, together with my management team and the board, we have fallen short of what we said. And I must therefore take accountability and take responsibility for what I said. So I wasn't shocked, and I think he's a person of great integrity.
Do you think he should be the only one taking the fall? What about the rest of the board members? What about the executives at Eskom?
Well, the other board members, we're going to revamp the board, and the board that was working with Jabu. And you see, Jabu occupied a dual role. He was both acting CEO and chairman. And he felt this much more acutely. And of course, as we revamp the board, we will also be looking at the board's performance in the past. And the executive management, we've got a new CEO now. And a CEO is the captain of the ship. He must be given the opportunity to look at the capability of his managers and his executives and take a view. And he must make the call. And we give him all the right to do so without much interference, and may I add, maybe no interference from us. We must give him space to run the state-owned enterprise.
Well, I mean, members of this board told Parliament that there was interference, and are you happy with how the member of the executive in charge for this portfolio, the Public Enterprises Minister, is doing?
Well, he has had to deal with very difficult portfolios. Let's face it. We're having to deal with a state enterprise like Eskom, which keeps on having load shedding, and SAA, and Denel, and a number of others. It's quite a heavy sum job. And he's had to juggle quite a number of balls, and getting concerned, getting calls in the middle of the night, So I think, yes, he's done and he's been doing the best he can, but it is a very, very trying and difficult portfolio. The type that is very exacting and demanding in more ways than one.
There is, of course, a conversation around whether Eskom should, in fact, be taken to energy. Do you have a position on that?
Well, Department of Mineral Resources and Energy is the policy arm of our energy architecture. So it's a discussion that has been thrown out into the public, but as far as we are concerned now, it's been run as part of public enterprises. So we will see how that works itself out. But energy has largely been on energy policy.
You don't have a preference as to where it should go?
Well, I've always held the view that once we have stabilized Eskom, we should then be able to look at how we synchronize everything, policy process as well as the execution process, and see where the two can actually be positioned. So it's something that, for me, can be handled as time goes on. Right now, we've got a burning platform. We've got to stabilize that platform. And once we've stabilized it, we then move forward. There needs to come a time in the South African, body politic space where we no longer need to worry about public enterprises. And the SOE Council that I'm setting up will have to debate this, because I want to see us get to a point like Singapore, which has Temasek. Temasek is almost like the total control of all their state-owned enterprises, and they have full confidence of the government and independence to run the state-owned enterprises, and they've been running them very successfully. And they don't necessarily have a ministry called state-owned enterprises. They have an entity that runs that. There needs to come a time when we will have a situation like that. But right now, in the transformative stage, we need to bed down everything and make sure that we move forward. And I see a really great future where the state will be a key player in the economy. Right now, controls about 30%. We need a very strong, intelligent state that is able to have entities that it runs, and as it runs them, they must fulfill a developmental mandate as well as a commercial mandate, but focus more on improving the lives of South Africans. Eskom in itself has done extremely well in the past. Look at the rollout of electricity. Whereas in the past, almost about 60% of South Africans had electricity. Now with Eskom in the new democratic era, has been able to ramp that up to almost 87%, which is a phenomenal achievement. So you need a very strong state-owned enterprise which will run commercially, but looking more closely after the developmental mandate.
Let's talk about the other parastatal, South African Airways. Is there a business case for SAA? Do we need the airline?
There is a business case for South African Airways because we need an entity that will fly the national flag. We also need an entity that will focus also on the other developmental mandate we have, which is bring in tourists in the country. And right now we're looking at a situation where SAA can be so well repositioned as to be able to play that role. And even with SAA, I envisage a situation where SAA will no longer be a burden on the fiscus, will no longer come to the fiscus for bailouts of any sorts, and it will run successfully on its own, flying the South African flag, so that we are able to achieve that developmental mandate that we've got. But of course, yes, there are other airlines, and those other airlines must also continue running to have competition in the system.
But it keeps on taking up a lot of money that perhaps, some people are arguing can be better utilized elsewhere.
Clearly, the money that we've been giving to SAA could be better utilized elsewhere, and that is why, as it was about to go into liquidation, seriously, the view was that we should plug the hole, reposition SAA, which is precisely what we are in the process of doing now. We've got lots of people employed in SAA, and we've got lots of skills that have been imparted, and particularly to black people, throughout the years of democracy. And we need to see a better future for an SAA. So I want to see an SAA where we no longer bail it out. The money that we would have put into SAA, we build schools, we build clinics, we build houses, and we build roads. And I think that future is eminently possible. And I think we've got the ingredients that can enable us to do that.
Well, while you have to deal with these SOEs, look at how to fully unlock the country's economic potential. Within your party, the ANC, all is not well there either.
Well, I don't know what you mean by all is not well. You know, the ANC is a broad church. We are a broad church, and we are a wonderful collection of people who are well endowed with good thoughts, good ideas, and our task, and my task also as president, is to ensure that we continue building consensus. We continue molding that consensus that should emerge. And sometimes there may be different views on a variety of issues. And I'm not unfazed about that, because it's possible that people will have a variety of views. But we mold that consensus so that we can move forward. And in the main, that's what we've been able to achieve. I mean, if you look at our conferences quite often, we've got people, provinces and regions that come to conference with different resolution proposals, and we mold that consensus, and then we emerge with a common position, and then we move forward. And of course, sometimes we don't always speak with one voice on issues, and that's what we're working on. And that's what being a live and dynamic organization is all about. So we are molding everything to ensure that in the end, yes, we do speak with one voice, one message, many voices. That's what the ANC should be all about.
Well, you're going to a policy review conference in June. Are you worried at all that perhaps there may be people who may have not backed you at Nasrec, who may want to resuscitate debates and arguments, even if it's just to show you up?
No, I'm not worried about the NGC. The NGC really is about reviewal of our performance, what we have done in the interim since we were elected. We want to look at whether the policies that we adopted still have currency. Do we need to tweak them? Do we need to refashion them, given the conditions that we are operating under right now? So I'm not concerned about the NGC that's coming. And we are a democratic organization. We must have debate. We must have open debate. And any leader who is worth their salt must be willing to accept debate like that. If they are to be criticized, they must be criticized. Leadership is about being man or woman enough to be criticized and to accept the counsel of your peers, of your colleagues. And when you can do that, then you are a mature leader. But if you cannot do that and want to block debate because you're trying to run away from things like being criticized, being reviewed, then you are not a leader worth your salt. So I go to the NGC with a very open and very clean heart, knowing that the African National Congress that I am a member of is a responsible organization that will be focusing on what the NGC should do. Review performance, review our policies with a view of moving forward. Because this revolution does not move in a straight line. There are detours, there are corners that we have got to navigate, and that is what the NGC will have to preoccupy itself with.
Speaking of criticism, the people will say, look, you've had ample time to actually show, deliver on the promises that you have made, and you've missed a lot of opportunities along the way. Does that worry you? Does that criticism hurt you?
No. And I often ask, what is it? Because the sharpest end of that criticism is that you said you will deal with corruption. People are not arrested. They are not in jail. They are not wearing orange overalls. And I said, you know, South Africans should be very worried if, as president, I was the type of president who was going to be pursuing people and having them locked up, taking them to jail. Because once that starts to happen, then we've got a dictatorship. So they should really be worried. As for the other things, where criticism, I guess, would be valid, is that state-owned enterprises have not performed as well as they should have. And I accept that. I accept criticism in relation to ESCOM. I accept that because everybody, including myself, are unhappy when there's load shedding. And when SAA does not work, people will be happy when they don't get onto their flights and all that. So all that one takes and said, but we are not sitting on our laurels. We are working on it. So it is not for lack of doing anything. If it was criticism where I was doing nothing about any of these matters, then I would say, then it would possibly hurt. But it is criticism that is in some cases valid, but we are doing something. We are laying a foundation. And I'd like South Africans to realize that what we are actually having to deal with, it's a long-term process. We are dealing with a malaise and a situation that took years to develop. And many of us expect that it will be repaired and done within a year or two. It is going to take a long time. One of the issues that we're having to deal with is just the capability of the state. Capability of the state has been deeply and vastly reduced. And that you cannot turn around. It's almost like a tanker. It takes a long time to turn around. We have realized it, and we are working on it. So when we criticize, we must realize, where do we come from? What are we doing? Have we laid out a clear path to the future? And I'd like to believe that that's exactly what we are going to do. I'm not a lazy president. I work day in and day out. And my task is focused on repositioning our state, repositioning our country, and that is what preoccupies me. And if I was lazy, I would not be in this job.
So, President, I'm told I've already exceeded the time allocated to me. Thank you very much for your time, President Cyril Ramaphosa, on the back, of course, of that January 8th statement that he delivered today.